been working for months to get the mounts configured for my first movie of this type. Producing Little Prop Big Prop, I shot all the POV, which means point of view shots, on the airplane with one camera. Now with 6 cameras, there were 6 times as many things to go wrong. The cameras have to be aimed properly, they need to be leveled, they have to be relatively free of vibration, and this vibration can come from the engine and from the propeller. With this 2-stroke motor running at 4,000 to 6,000 RPM and a propeller running at 1,500 to 2,300 RPM, there are harmonics just coursing throughout the airframe. In addition, the cameras are buffeted by the wind, so that needs to be controlled. I've developed methods for dealing with this over the years, but, they're not as good as I would like. By the time of the Harper Run, I had been working on camera mounts for 5 months and had made about 15 test flights. After each flight, I would review the footage to determine what needed to be fixed. Over the years, I have a pretty good idea when doing these playback sessions as to what is causing whatever visual ugliness I may be encountering, but sometimes an issue is just downright mystifying. Early on in the testing, only 1 or 2 of the camera's movie image would be acceptable, so I would take good notes regarding what I thought were the issues with the other 4 or 5 cameras and then devise embellishments to the mounts or build new ones until I got it down to all 6 cameras functioning pretty good. The week before the Harper Run, I decided I'd had enough of this stuff. I was getting behind on my sky surfing safaris because I didn't want to go on those journeys with 6 camera mounts strung across the airframe. They do provide enough drag that I didn't think I could get the range performance I like to have. Also, the nose mounts are so low to the ground, I did not want them on the plane in case I wanted to land in a field or on a gravel road. It would be easy for that mount to get hung up in those cases. I picked Harper because it is relatively close to the Selby Aerodrome, about an hour, and has a nice runway, and because I had not written about it yet, for sky surfing. As you've been seeing in the pictures so far, when I arrived at Selby Aerodrome that morning, the area was completely fogged in. This is pretty rare in this part of Kansas, happening about once a year. Usually it fades away as soon as the sun rises, but that day it hung on for hours. The first shots you see were taken at 6:15 a.m. before sunrise. Not 15 minutes later did I discover I had forgotten to bring the rear camera. I was not happy about this because it's a minimum 40-minute round trip back to my house to get it, but that's what I did, and when I got back I proceeded to mount all 6 cameras, which takes about 35 to 45 minutes. The field was still fogged in after all that. Knowing this area, I knew it couldn't last. On top of that, I knew it would not be very thick even if it didn't clear off. There was no way it would be socked in all morning, so I decided I would take off, climb, and look around. I'm really glad I did because, well, you're going to see why. As you can see, because the Quicksilver is so lightly wing-loaded, it gets into the air fairly quickly. Also, I'm pretty sure you didn't miss that we picked up some water on the nose forward camera, but as you'll see, that dries off here pretty quick. You'd think I didn't already have enough to do, but I saw a scene that just had to be captured, so I reached for the camera that I keep on a lanyard around my neck and took a couple shots. Due to the extreme wide-angle lens they put on these cameras, distances are not what they appear. Another thing is that when you shoot into the sun, like this shot here off the right wing, clouds bloom out, so it looks like I'm embedded in the clouds. But as you can see, I was actually cutting between them and had good separation. All through climb out, I had at least a mile of visibility. Although it's not completely apparent from these movies, I was never in any kind of a whiteout condition, and man, you sure don't want to go into a cloud. That can be a disaster. All the way up here I could see for quite a ways around me, and I basically climbed up through holes in the clouds and got on top. Even though I was above the clouds at about 600 to 800 feet, by the time I got to 1,300 feet, it just felt like I was in the stratosphere. It was really an interesting experience. I really enjoyed it. I would have liked to stay above the clouds a lot longer, but the headwind was causing me a ground speed of only about 22, 23 miles an hour, and I wasn't going to make Harper with that kind of speed. So I started looking for a place to let down and get down below the wind. Now when you fly down this low, there's only two things you got to watch out for: wires and wires. What you can see from this scene though is that you're really not looking for the wires, you're looking for the poles. As long as you keep surveying the area for the poles, everything's all right. Now when I skim the surface of the Great Plains, sometimes I come across areas that are just completely flat, and other times you see hedgerows. I'm going to give you a nice look at a hedgerow here. Actually, now that I see it again, this is a creek with trees along the edge of it, but we're coming up on a couple of other genuine hedgerows here in a second. I'm getting down there low to give you some good visuals. One thing that I hadn't told you about earlier is that I'm always looking way ahead to make sure that when I cross one of these hedgerows, I'm not buzzing a farmhouse or a little herd of cattle. and so that's not readily apparent, and you can't see them when you're down low like this right here. So you have to get up a little bit higher, but that's what I had done earlier before I reached this area. It never ceases to amaze me how beautiful these crops are. These farmers here in Kansas and Oklahoma are just masters. Just acres and acres of, I think these are beans here in this case, but just everywhere. All the crops just grow so well, it's just amazing. Now off to the port side, I'm sure you've noticed a farm. I stay a minimum 500 feet away from them, most of the time a little farther than that, but anytime I see somebody, they always wave, and everybody really likes what I'm doing. I'm very careful not to scare the cattle or the horses. Actually, cattle are pretty amenable, but horses, you just want to give them a lot more leeway. Cattle, as long as you do not appear to approach them directly, they'll just sit there and watch you, even at fairly close distances. But horses are a whole different story. They're just very skittish depending on the weather, and you can tell that you just have to stay a lot farther away from them so that they don't get wild. Now, as I climb to look over the top of this hedgerow and make sure there's no farmhouses there, lo and behold, it's a river. Now, I want you to know that I don't make a habit of doing this, but hey, I'm making a movie. I figured you'd really like to see this. And so I decided to drop down and do a little river running of the Ninnascaw River. See what you think. Okay, you might be one of the people asking yourself, why does this guy fly so low? Well, there's a practical reason and there's a fun reason. So first, the practical side of it. A few years back, I decided I would attempt to do some cross-country flying in this ultralight. Now, the thing only flies, for best fuel economy at about 40 miles an hour airspeed. Now, if you run into a 20-mile-an-hour headwind, which is not uncommon around here, you're only getting 20 miles an hour across the ground. I've determined that I can go places if I get at least 30 miles an hour across the ground, but 20, I might as well stay home. Ever since I can remember, I've marveled at the fact that very small birds and even butterflies could fly against a pretty strong wind. and I just couldn't figure that out. But in aerodynamics, they have a concept they call a boundary layer, and basically the air close to a surface is static. It doesn't like to move as fast as the surrounding air, so they call it a boundary layer. And though usually the boundary layer, as far as in aerodynamics, is only talked about with supersonic or very fast airplanes, I started thinking that maybe it would be operative in the low-speed environment that I'm flying in. In this case, though, I decided the boundary would be the earth rather than the skin of the airplane. In addition to that, I noticed that when I flew early in the morning, you could encounter a wind at altitudes as low as 300 feet that might be 30 miles an hour, and down on the surface is pretty much nil. This seems to change during the day. Wind at altitude comes down lower to the surface. And also you have what's called the ground effect. Ground effect gives you additional lift at 1/2 of the wingspan of the aircraft, so above the ground. So if you stay at 1/2 of the wingspan of the aircraft above the ground, you'll get a lot more efficiency, and you can stay in the air with much less power. So that's another part of it right there too. I tied these concepts together and have found that it works real well. I can fly out on a tank of gas on an ultralight up to 100, I've actually gone up 108 miles by using this method. Okay, and practicalities aside, I said there was a fun component to this, and there's no denying that. I really like flying down low. It reminds me of a magic carpet. You know, you're floating above the earth. It's very it's all consuming. It's one of those rare times where there's nothing going on in your mind. You're just completely focused on what you're doing, but at the same time it's very relaxing. It's just a fully engaging thing to do. I've heard people say that about skiing or surfing, and that's why I'm the sky surfer. And so there's that part of it too. Obviously you have to stay on top of it and be alert, but out here in the prairie, like I said, the only thing you have to look out for is wires, and you have to keep your engine in good shape, because if it fails on you, you're going to be on the ground pretty quick. But again, that's what's good about being out here in the prairie. I can land just about anywhere, except of course in the Ninnascaw riverbed, and that's why you don't see me do that every day. Here's something I remembered that I wanted to show you. I was talking about ground effect and how you can reduce your power and stay airborne as long as you're at the right altitude above the ground, which is pretty low. But you'll have to be aware that even when there's a little swell like there is right here, it doesn't seem to be, they're not going over a mountain or anything, but if it starts rising a little bit, you got to add a little power, and you could hear that in the motor. Now coming up, you see a pretty good sized hedgerow, and as we get closer there will be a gap in it that I could easily fit the airplane through. But the reason that I decide not to do that, and on a lot of these that are situated in that manner, is because it's next to a road. And as I said before, what you're looking for are not the wires but the poles. And when you have a hedgerow like this, the poles might be hidden inside the hedgerow, and therefore you would miss the wire or catch it, however you look at that. Now this will be interesting for those of you who are not from this area. From a distance I could see better than the camera shows you. There was nobody around, so I'm going to take you in close to a modern haystack. This is a John Deere farm for sure. You see they have 2 full-size combines. They usually have air conditioning in those cabs, and then they had the tractor next to it. There's still evidence here of the massive downpour that had occurred earlier in the week. About 5 minutes earlier, you might remember I put up something talking about how I was going to have to decide which way to go around the farmsteads that were all congregated together. And that's the best way I can figure out how I ended up where I am now, because it's Conway Springs, and Conway Springs should be about 2 miles south of the path that I'm taking to Harper. Conway Springs is a nice little town that I'd like to visit here soon. In the next year or so for one of my sky surfing adventures. It's one of these places though that doesn't have an airstrip, so the way I handle that is I'll do a lot of research, look for a field, try to find out who the field owner is, and then get permission to land there, and then I'll walk around and take pictures, meet people, and write up a story. So you'll be looking ahead here on Sky Surfing, the flight blog, for when I get a chance to go to Conway Springs. But until then, here's what it looks like from the air. On my sky safaris, I always have certain things that I look for, one of which we're going to see a little bit later. But right now we're coming up on one of my favorites. I hand out awards, in my mind anyway, for the best looking farmstead of the day. And that's what you're seeing right here. One thing that draws me to them is the round top silos. I'm told that they don't hold as much as the square ones, but I think they look much better. Back out on the prairie again. One thing that I notice when I see the movies that I'm shooting here is that my ultralight has a tendency to yaw quite a bit, or hunt in the yaw axis. I think it's exaggerated a little bit by the nature of these cameras. They're wide angle. You'll see, particularly in the shot over my shoulder, that the nose tends to go to the left and the right a lot. My good buddy Captain Doug Muller pointed out to me that this plane's rather short coupled, and I'm not making an excuse for that, although it is. But primarily what you're seeing here is my idea about letting the plane pretty much do what it wants to do as long as it goes in the general direction that I want it to go. It's all part of my theory that I can get more efficiency out of it if I ride the waves, so to speak, and allow the plane to go as it will, with me just nudging it along here and there. So you'll see a little bit of that as I fly. Now some may just see a plowed field here, but I found this very interesting and colorful. I hope the cameras give you some sense of what I'm talking about. But I think part of what I'm seeing here is that the farmers will add chalk or some type of pulverized limestone, basically calcium carbonate, to change the pH of the field. And I think that's part of what we're seeing here, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I just found it very interesting to look at. Also, we're getting some variation from the cloud cover in the sun, but it was really nice to look at. You know, I said early on the main thing to watch out for flying down this low is wire. Well, it's not only electric wire, it could be barbed wire like this one right here. I'm sure you've figured out by now that I really like this Quicksilver for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that the gas tank is transparent. You can see right into it, and you can check it anytime you want because it's right over your head. Suddenly ahead and a little bit to the right, I see a small herd of cattle and decide to cut to the left. As I said before, if you don't appear to be coming straight at them, they don't seem to much care and they'll just watch you go by. These little gullies seem to pop up out of nowhere. And after this, I have a little roller coaster section for you. You know, I've always been slightly underwhelmed when I hear people from the East or West Coast condescendingly refer to the Great Plains as the Great Nothingness or boring. It's like they're walking around with their eyes closed. I mean, really? Flyover country indeed. Even though there hasn't been a lot of evidence thus far on this flight, I can tell you that there's loads of wildlife out here on the plains. Lots of deer, ducks, pheasants, turtles, and loads of coyotes. Now as we approach at this low level, we see what could be a forest, so I gain some altitude to take a look around, and turns out it's not very many trees. And regardless though, I want to go around it so that I don't have an issue in case I lose my motor. You just can't land these airplanes in the top of the trees. But as I do that, I see some cattle over here. You'll see them better here in a second. So I have to swing back over, and I just make the decision to go over the trees. I could still make it over those if I lost the motor. You'll note the cattle, they don't seem to care. They just sit there and watch me go by. Again, I'm down here low where you can't see ahead if there's a tree line. So I gather a little bit of altitude to take a look around. Figure I'm going to be crossing over another little group of trees. But hey, it turns out to be another river. This one's called the Chikoski. It's part of the Salt Fork of the Arkansas River. It heads down toward Oklahoma from here. Let's fly down a little bit and check it out. Now, if you remember way back to when I started this piece, I went on and on and on about how hard it was for me to hook up the cameras and mount them and all that sort of thing. One thing that I didn't realize until after this flight was I wasn't getting a full charge on my camera batteries. I had never really run them this long. They were supposed to run for 2 hours, which still hasn't happened, but I wasn't charging them properly. So what you're going to start seeing is that I'll have fewer camera angles to choose from. It's not going to ruin the deal, and this big thing that I have coming up next, we still have a lot of camera angles to cover it from. We're going to shorten it as we get toward the destination in order to make use of what I do have, as some of these cameras start to die from lack of battery power. Now, if you think about it, just in this short amount of time we've been flying here, we've seen an enormous amount of things, and frankly, it's typical for one of these sky safaris. We started off floating like an angel above the clouds. We got to go over and under a lot of power lines. We went down 2 rivers, the Ninneskah and the Chikoski. We saw a coyote. We got the bird's eye view of Conway Springs. We saw some wonderful countryside, including corn and hay and beans and grazing areas, a huge haystack, a beautiful blue sky above with the kind of clouds I like, the cumulus clouds, and a beautiful green plain below. What else could you ask for? You know, earlier I said I like to keep kind of a award ceremony going on in my head with regard to the nicest farmstead that I see in my travel. I also look forward to what I call bagging a train. I love to pull up near a train and look at it. Technically, bagging a train requires that the engineer wave at me. Anyway, stay tuned for the climax that the good Lord has given us to close out the Harper Run. About 6 miles northeast of Harper, the sun illuminates something bright and moving that catches my eye due south of my position. Providence is with us. A train is coursing along the track that cuts through the center of Harper. Even though I'm getting low on fuel, I know with all the cameras on board, this is a movie opportunity not to miss. I step up the power from 4600 to 5600 RPM. Some of this additional power is required just to catch up to the train, but even more is needed to counter the south wind, which had built up to about 20 miles per hour with gusts to 25. The relatively large wing that is under such a relatively low load enables the Quicksilver to cruise nice and slow in the manner that you've been seeing thus far. That's a great thing for the low and slow distance flying we've been doing. On the other hand, dramatically increasing the power does not make it fly all that much faster. Its desire is to climb, so the nose must be constantly forced to stay down when you power up. This, the increasing wind from the south, the turbulence created by the train, and the combination of the two of these things compounding on the downwind side of the train the closer I got, made for a very active flight regime. It made me think of what it must be like trying to gallop a horse in a thunderstorm. Now that I've caught up to it, you can see that this train's carrying a lot of semi-truck trailers. Could be a couple hundred of them. I mean, it's a long train. But even then, while I've caught up, I still have to watch out for the wires. So let's go over these and then back down. And now here's where the wind starts really whipping the plane around. You can see it's bouncing out here on the wing. From this perspective, you can tell that because the train was on an embankment that we're actually below the train, and you can get a better feel for how much turbulence was down there. I was really having to work the stick, and it was pretty fun ride. After I figured I had about enough of that, I climbed from below the train to about 20-30 feet above it, but I was still on the leeward side, and you can see there was still a lot of turbulence. This is the picture you just saw me take, and as you can see, the train is heading right for the center of Harper. Another thing you might notice is that the sound has changed, and that's because, like I told you earlier, I was losing some battery power. The two cameras that just went down were the ones that gave the best sound of the engine and propeller. So rather than listen to basically a lot of wind noise off the remaining cameras, I'm going to turn up some surf music. I love these guys because they obviously studied the Ventures and the Safaris and groups like that and did very faithful representations of that style. And since we're losing cameras and we only have basically 8 minutes and 10 seconds left of real-time aviation here before we touch down at the airfield, I'll show you a few more things as we get closer, but I'm going to tighten this up a little bit, show you some still pictures that I took also, and then we'll land. So now we're on the east side of Harper. You can tell I've climbed a bit. That's so I could get to a proper altitude for entering the pattern over at the airport, which is on the south side, which we're heading over that way. I took some pictures with my still camera also, and I'll show you what that looked like. Now I'm getting ready to enter the pattern at Harper Municipal. It's a left-hand pattern. One of the things you're going to see me do is whip my head around a lot and eyeball everywhere I can to look for traffic and make sure we don't have any mid-air collision, because that's a potential whenever you're around an airport traffic pattern, particularly uncontrolled airports, which most airports are in America. You don't have a tower, so you don't have an air traffic controller directing traffic, so we have these different methods to ensure that we can all land safely. We have what you call VFR rules, visual flight rules, and it basically means see and avoid. And there are certain ways to enter a pattern, so there are places where you can expect to see other airplanes if they're in the area. Because I'm flying without a radio, I don't have any way to announce my presence on Unicom, but that's not that big a deal. If you just pay attention and do what you're supposed to do and look around, it's not a problem. As I taxied in, a youngster appeared from behind the hangar, whom I later learned was named Caden. He was attempting to direct me to the tie-downs near the fueling station. Having been around airplanes for much of his young life, he naturally assumed that was where I needed to go. But if you look at the dancing grass, you can see that the winds gusting to over 20 miles an hour required a different scenario for my ultralight. Conditions such as this can push along or even lift up a plane like this once you exit the aircraft, because it becomes even that much lighter then. So special measures are called for. We sat there face to face for a little while, but because of the noise we couldn't talk. So I motioned that I'd be parking on the leeward side of the T hangar that faced south. This would provide a wind shadow for my MXL and greatly reduce the power of the wind against it. Also, I carry my own tie downs with stakes and a hammer to pound into the ground, and I would be using them too. After killing the engine behind the T hangar, I still had concerns, so I turned the tail in the direction of the wind so there would be no possibility of the wind whipping around a corner and lifting one of my wings. After I got all this done, I gave my fellow aviators a tour of the Quicksilver before tying it down in preparation for heading into town to take more pictures for the story I eventually posted to Sky Surfing the Flight blog. After watching this, I'm sure you will want to see the story with some of the sights and people of Harper, and then my blisteringly fast 30-mile-an-hour tailwind boosted 60 to 70 mile per hour ground speed ride back to my new home airfield, the newly rechristened Blue Sky Ranch and Aerodrome. It was deluxe. Well, blue skies and tailwinds from Brian FitzGerald, the Sky Surfer. Till next time.